Welcome everyone. My name is Dhammashanti. I'm a Buddhist nun living in Sri Lanka at the Paramitha International Buddhist Meditation Centre. Due to circumstances with the coronavirus, all of our meditation programs are currently cancelled at the centre, and so we thought we would record some teachings for you online that might be useful for you during these uncertain and difficult times. So this is the third in this series of Dhamma talks. In the last talk, I briefly outlined the different schools of Buddhism, a little bit about the history of Buddhism, in order to share with you my own approach to Buddhism, or the teachings of the Buddha. In the modern world, there are many different ways to approach the teachings of the Buddha. We know that there are the three main schools of Buddhism, the Theravada, the Mahayana, and the Vajrayana. But even within these schools, there are different approaches to meditation, different approaches to interpreting the teachings of the Buddha. So it's important to know where anyone teaching Buddhism is coming from, their background, their approach, and so that you can make your own decision about which approach suits you. I'm not saying that my approach is right and that everyone else is wrong, or that this is going to be the approach that resonates with everyone. I hope that for some people it might be useful, and if it's useful for you, that I hope you continue to listen to this series of Dhamma talks. So my own approach to Buddhism is not the Theravada traditional approach, although I'm a Theravada Buddhist nun. And mainly this was because of the influence of my teacher, who I briefly introduced to you last time. His name is Venerable Madhavela Punnaji Mahathero, affectionately known in the West as Bhanthe Punnaji. So this talk, I want to explain to you a little bit about him and why his approach to the teachings of the Buddha was untraditional or unconventional. Some might even say controversial. So when we go against tradition a little bit, things can seem a little bit confusing for people who are only used to the traditional ways of looking at things. But I think it's important to have different voices, and we can all discuss and share our different ideas about the teachings, and hopefully all learn from each other. So in the last talk, I briefly mentioned that my teacher sometimes referred to his teachings as proto-Buddhism, or what we might call early Buddhism, which is the type of Buddhism that was available to others before Buddhism became fractured into different schools. So sometimes it's also called pre-sectarian Buddhism. The search for what was the teachings of the Buddha before there was the proliferation of different sects and different interpretations of the Buddha's teachings. So this was the approach of my teacher. He wanted to try to discover the original teachings of the Buddha, which he called proto-Buddhism, the basis of all the schools of Buddhism in the modern world today, so that we might try to find what was closer to the original message before it became adulterated by different interpretations, different texts, different schools of Buddhism. My teacher, Bhante Punnaji, was a Sri Lankan Buddhist monk. He was born in Sri Lanka in 1929, and he was from a very privileged background, quite a high status family, aristocratic family. He was the only son in that family, and he received a very high level of education as a result near Kandy. He was born in a town called Kurunangala, which is a little bit further out from Kandy. He received his primary and secondary education in Kandy, in Sri Lanka. Before teaching for some time, he was very much interested in science, especially psychology, about the mind. He was interested in the teachings of Freud and other early psychologists that were available during his student days. He was also interested in the human body, so biology, physiology. So this was, he had a background in science, and eventually he attained a degree at the Medical College of Colombo and was a medical practitioner until his perhaps mid-30s, where the desire to become a monk was becoming stronger and stronger. From a young age, he was influenced by his mother, who was a devout Buddhist, and he started practicing meditation from approximately 7 years old, especially loving kindness or metta meditation. And he had some profound experiences in his meditation, and eventually, even as a teenager, he began to dig deeper into the teachings of the Buddha by researching, studying, discussing the teachings of the Buddha with other monks and other practitioners. Even at such an early stage, one thing he came to realize was that even in the Theravada school of Buddhism, which is what we find here in Sri Lanka, what is presented as the traditional teachings of the Buddha is really an adulterated form of Buddhism, in the sense that over the 2,500 years since the Buddha's passing away, many foreign ideas have fallen into the teachings of the Buddha. Many people have become to interpret the Buddha's teachings in different ways. So even then he understood, especially in Sri Lanka, the traditional teachings are very heavily based on what we call the commentaries, which is texts written by monks quite some time after the Buddha. And now many teachers rely on these secondary texts, the commentaries, to teach us Buddhism. But he found that the commentaries were not a reliable source of the Buddha's teachings, and what we call the suttas, which is directly attributed to the Buddha, is the most reliable source, and that we should be basing our teachings and our practice on these early suttas. Especially in the Theravada school, these are found in the Pali language. So he sought to find the very early teachings of the Buddha, rather than base his practice on what came later on. So anyway, in his mid-30s, he really wanted to become a monk. His parents had passed away by that stage. He was sure about his commitment to full-time practice, and he ordained as a monk at the Vajrayana temple in Colombo. And eventually, shortly after his ordination, he travelled to the island hermitage in southern Sri Lanka, sometimes referred to as Dorandua, and he began to practice intense meditation. And during those retreats at the island hermitage, he experienced deep states of meditation, and was able to gain a profound insight through his own experience of meditation into the teachings of the Buddha. Eventually, a few years later, his teacher asked him to travel to America, to Washington DC, where he had set up the first Theravada Buddhist monastery in America. It's still in existence today, called the Washington Mahavihara. Because my teacher had a good English and a good scientific background, he thought his teacher thought he would be particularly suited to teaching people in the West about meditation and the teachings of the Buddha. Especially in that time, in the early 70s, more Westerners were becoming interested in meditating and the philosophy of Buddhism. So in the early 70s, he traveled to Washington, eventually establishing monasteries in Canada as well, in Toronto and Mississauga. And he spent nearly 40 years teaching Buddhism in North America. Finally, in the last 10 years of his life, he was based in Malaysia, teaching meditation at the Buddhist Mahavihara in Kuala Lumpur, which is around the time I came in contact with him. Through a stroke of luck, before becoming a nun. I was searching desperately for a teacher whose approach to the teachings of the Buddha made sense to me, that resonated with me. And the teachings of Bhanthe Punnaji was like a light in the darkness for me. It was like I was blind and he helped me see. That's how much he changed my life, my understanding of Buddhism and my meditation practice. So for nearly 8 years, I was fortunate enough to learn from him, practice meditation under his guidance, discuss the Dhamma with him, attend his retreats, and unfortunately in 2018, in July, he passed away peacefully at the age of 88. He passed away in his sleep, having taught meditation the day before, and it was a great loss to all of us, but I'm sure that wherever he is now, because of the huge service that he did to the by teaching the Buddha's message tirelessly for 50 years, that from those merits he has attained a good rebirth. So why I want to explain to you a little bit about my teacher is that as these talks go on, some of you might notice that some of the things I'm saying are a little bit different from the traditional teachings that you might have come across before in other texts or from other teachers. And this is because my approach, my teacher's approach, was a little bit different, a bit unique. Some might consider controversial, going against the traditions, the stream. But to me, very helpful, made a lot of sense and really changed my own life. So I want to bring this talk to an end now by suggesting that if anyone is interested in finding a little bit more about Bhanthe Punnaji, my teacher, you can just Google Bhanthe Punnaji and websites and talks on YouTube will come up. And I also highly recommend to anyone, especially those new to Buddhism, his book, introductory book to the teachings of the Buddha, which is called Return to Tranquility. This is the best introduction to Buddhism that I've come across, the best introduction to his teachings, and it's available for free download at www.bhantepunnaji.com. Or you can just Google Return to Tranquility and it will come up. So for any further information, this is a good source. So thank you everybody for joining me. I wish you all good health, peace and happiness. May all beings everywhere be free from suffering.